Hi, it's Corbett Harrison, and today I am building a project as a teacher in order to share it with my students so that they could do the same project, perhaps using the same tools I'm using right now, just with a different book. Teacher model, that's what I'm creating here for you today, and I'm using Screencast-O-Matic and Google Slides to do so. I have a Saturday workshop coming up where all teachers participating will be creating possible examples to show their own students of Screencast-O-Matics that they've created. This is serving as one of my examples. Let me get my picture over there on top of the cat's head. This is an example in my class of what we would call a book talk. And with a book talk, in between my assigned readings, we have time for 2, maybe 3 independent novel options in my class, and at the end of all of those we do what's called a book talk. Our reading workshop is what it's called, and your job with a book talk is you have to talk about 5 different smart things related to the book, and the 5 categories I give the students are listed at left there, but their presentation needs to talk about 5 different things, and if they don't have 5 different things they want to talk about in regards to the book, they have some places where they can jump off with my list there. I'm going to show you an example of this, and even though this is a picture book, my students would be doing examples for chapter books, but there's no reason that a picture book can't serve as a book talk as well, and that's why I'm using it that way today. So here is my book talk on Six-Dinner-Sid by Inga Moore. First of all, the basic story so that you understand what I'm talking about. So there's this cat, his name's Sid, and he has made himself home at 6 different houses, which all happen to be aligned with each other, and the neighbors don't even know it. They each feed him 6 different times a day, and so he becomes a fat, happy cat. Six-Dinner-Sid, happy where he is. Well, then the neighbors find out through a series of events, and they get together and they decide poor Sid should not have 6 dinners. We will rotate so that 6 only gets 1 dinner a day, because 6 dinners a day for a cat can't be a very good thing. Six-Dinner-Sid becomes 1-Dinner-Sid, and then of course that's when the conflict begins for Sid. There's an external conflict. Does he go along with this new rule? Should he only get 1 meal a day? And that leads to an internal conflict. Do I stay? Sid asks. Do I go? And ultimately, sorry, spoiler alert, Sid decides to go. And in the resolution, he ends up finding a better place where the 6 neighbors talk to each other, and they decide, you know what? If the cat wants 6 dinners a day, let him have 6 dinners a day. That's the basic story of Six-Dinner-Sid by Inga Moore. Let's talk about dynamic versus static characters. Remember the difference. Dynamic change, static more or less stay the same, and in doing so, if we look at those characters, we can often find themes based on why the character changed or why the character didn't change. I would have to say that Sid in this story is much more static than he is dynamic. He's a stubborn cat. He wants 6 dinners a day, and that's what he's going to get. And when it comes into question whether he will or not, conflict. And then the first group of families, the ones who live on Aristotle Street, I would call them more dynamic because they discovered what Sid was up to, and they had to fix the situation, and in doing so they become representative of what you would call dynamic characters. And then the second group of families, which we barely meet, they're just at the end, but they accept Sid right from the beginning and seem like they're going to accept Sid no matter what happens. And so I would call them more static as well. Now let's talk about the importance of setting before we get to the theme, what all this means from the story. I think the setting's important and can be discussed intelligently because there are these 2 neighborhoods, and what's interesting is they're both named for great thinkers. There's Aristotle Street and there's Pythagoras Place, and you'd think everybody would be smart on places like that, and you have to question, are they smart? Are they really as smart as Aristotle or Pythagoras? Or if one group ends up being smarter than the other group, does that mean the philosopher named for that group's neighborhood is the smarter philosopher? And so you kind of get into this debate, who's smarter, the Aristotle Street families or the Pythagoras families? But an interesting debate about intellectual comparative intellectuals who you think is more intelligent in that situation. And then there's just a picture of Aristotle Street and Pythagoras that now feels like it shouldn't have been there since I forgot to hit the button. Anyway, theme and moral of the story. What does this story mean? We're always asked to think about theme, moral, or what's the human truth in this story that needs to be uncovered by the author's clever tale. And, you think about theme from different characters' points of view. That first group of neighbors who didn't realize Sid was getting 6 dinners from them every day, I would say a theme for them is, hey, pay attention to what's going on around you. It's pretty easy to get schnookered, and that cat that cat had you wrapped around his finger. You're feeding him and didn't even realize he'd already been fed. So pay attention, first group of neighbors. Then, of course, got the second group of neighbors. And they are the ones who discover that, we don't keep secrets here. You're going to feed him. We're going to feed him. We all have there's no secret. So we're better neighbors because we talk to each other. Right from the start, we talk to each other. And that was the difference between the family lifestyles on those two streets. And then, of course, from Sid, what Sid had to discover is if everybody knows the secret up front, it's not a secret. And then once there are no secrets, life is less complicated and a whole lot more rewarding. Sid had to find a more rewarding place to live, and that was the place where he was just honest and upfront from the beginning. Hey, I'm a 6 dinner kind of cat every day. Make sure I get that, please. And the other thing I think about, if I think about themes for this book, I'm a dog person now. I used to be a cat person. But the other theme I think might come from Sid's point of view is, if you think about cats, they're just pretty fickle animals. I don't know if that's a really deep theme or a worldly view theme, but I like my dogs. They're a little bit more loyal. They wouldn't just move because they didn't like what I was feeding them. And so, last thing I want to talk about is the author's writing style. This is Inga Moore. She's a British author of children's books. And what I really want to talk about first in her writing style is her use of the plot chart that we've studied in class. It's almost I like this story because it's almost a perfect following of this map with this triangle that's got the two sides of a triangle that seem to have the same sides. It like almost perfectly follows this little map. I'm grabbing the mouse so I can point at things. There's exposition. We meet Sid. We see all the great things happening to him. That's our rising action. And then right in the very center of the book, it says everything was perfect for Sid, just about perfect, until ... and then that's when all the falling action. But that happens perfectly in the center of the book, falling action, and then Sid has to find his own resolution by moving away. But it's a nice example of when we study that plot chart. Here's a really perfect example of it. So that I noticed. I also noticed she did a lot of stuff with numbers in her sentences. The neighbors all live next to each other at number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so she plays on that. And in the first sentence I've given you here that I'm not going to read to you. You can read while I'm talking to you. But she sets up a cadence with the words, using the number over and over. It sets up a rhythm, a sound to it if you were to read that out loud. And it's predictable, and it gets long, but it's a nice, safe sound. And so she uses numbers well. And then if you look at her second sentence there, they're all the same words are there, number 1, number 2, but each one of them in that list, that series of 6, is presented in a completely different kind of way. It's a different little style or a piece of grammatical English so that it's talked about in a different way. So it's a really, really long sentence if you look at the whole thing, but you don't feel like you got lost in it because of the numbers, and each little visit to a place felt a little bit different because of the way of the wording. And then finally, in regards to the author's writing style, her word choice isn't very difficult. This is a pretty easy book for everyone to understand. But things like put on swanky airs and smooched, you might have to act that out with the little guys to make sure they understand what that is. I think it's funny that this book is about behavior, and the first 2 vocab words I pulled out were bad behavior versus what you do when you're being a playful behavior. So good vocabulary words that you can play with. Not a ton. It is just a children's book, but even so, it uses some nice words. And so what you have just seen from me is you've seen a book talk on 6-Dinner-Sid by Inga Moore that I could show as an example to my students and now challenge them to say, what would your book be? Could you go through the same thing, get it recorded using Screencast-O-Matic, and then be able to share it? We can load it on our iPads. We can load it on the big screen in class. We can load it on individual laptops. But now you have the ability to share your information. Coming back to the center, thanks for joining us today. I hope you have some great thoughts, teachers, in my workshop on now how you might use Screencast-O-Matic and Google Slides to help your kids see, hey, here's what one of your future projects might take the form of. Thanks. Have a great day.